Welcome back, everyone. We're doing the Second Servile War now. We did the first. We did the third. I know we did it out of order. But we started with the third with the Spartacus revolt, and then we did the first, and now we're doing the second. We're kind of understanding kind of like the layers of these Servile Wars and how they happened. The late Republic, obviously, is the time period of all of this. But just kind of understanding the parallels of the three and trying to figure out, okay, which one was the worst, which one, how did these two or three lead into the next steps of the Republic, XYZ. Glad you're here. Let's jump right in.
Previously, we covered the First Servile War and the leaders Eunice and Cleon's fight against their Roman masters. Although the revolt had little tangible effect on the Republic, they did become an inspiration for later slaves seeking to overthrow their masters. In 104 BC, just 30 years after the First Servile War,
and it's crazy because 30 years later, the third one. It's like a theme.
Sicily would once again be plunged into the chaos of a slave uprising. The Roman Republic had spent the last few years in long and difficult wars. The Jugurthine War of 112 to 106 BC, and the ongoing Cimbrian War, which started in 113 BC.
So this is going to be during Marius' time.
Following the conclusion of the Jugurthine War, its victor and one of Rome's best generals, Gaius Marius, had been given command of the Cimbrian War. The war had already cost Rome and her allies almost 60,000 men, forcing Marius to conduct a mass recruitment campaign in order to bolster his numbers. As a result, he had asked Nicomedes III of Bithynia for soldiers. However, Nicomedes replied saying that he would be unable to do so, as the majority of Bithynians suitable for military service had been seized as slaves by Romans for not being able to pay their taxes.
Well, that's unfortunate. Good for him, Nicomedes. Good for him.
The Senate responded by issuing a decree that no citizen of an allied state could be held as a slave in a Roman province. This decision was made in the hopes that it would provide Marius the manpower he would need to defeat the Cimbri.
You can't be a slave, but you have to go fight and die for me.
But would also cost the Republic dearly. In 104 BC, Publius Licinius Nerva, the propraetor of Sicily, wanting to quickly carry out the Senate's decree in his province, immediately set around 800 slaves of allied nations free. This decision not only alienated slaves of other nations, but also angered the nobles who owned large amounts of slaves, worried that they were going to lose their workforce. Through bribes and political pressure, Nerva quickly caved to the nobles, refusing to free any more slaves and sending those that appealed back to their masters.
So you gave them a taste? Ooh, that's dangerous.
As a result of this, 180 slaves outside of Syracuse revolted, killing their masters, taking up arms, and fortifying a hilltop location. Nerva quickly mustered together a force of soldiers and marched on the slaves. However, he did not have enough men to fully conduct a siege of their fortifications.
180 men? How many men do you need to combat 180 men for a siege?
Instead, he used loyal slaves to pretend to defect, enter the fortifications, and then betray the rebels, allowing the Romans to storm the fortifications. Some of the slaves were killed.
All three have betrayals. It's crazy.
In the fighting, whilst others, fearing capture, took their own lives.
It's so crazy how everything's just... It's just like a deja vu.
Nerva disbanded his troops shortly after. However, a much larger rebellion had taken place almost simultaneously. 80 slaves had risen up and killed Publius Clonius and Equites, and, having been left to their own devices, had managed to gather 800 slaves on Mount Caprianus outside Heracleia in just 1 week. As Nerva had not been aware of this uprising, and so had not taken any action against them, rumours spread that he was a coward, and by the time Nerva did find out, the force outside Heracleia numbered almost 2,000. The propraetor quickly headed to Heracleia, but hearing of the size of the enemy force, he ordered the garrison commander of Enna, Marcus Titinius, to take 600 of his men to confront the rebels. Titinius responded quickly and marched to Mount Caprianus, drawing his men up for battle. The mountainous terrain, however, did not lend itself to the formation-focused style of battle the Romans were accustomed to.
It becomes guerrilla warfare at that point, right?
Moreover, alongside their superior numbers, many of the slaves were armed with slings, and the higher terrain gave them a distinct advantage. The battle was short, as the Romans were quickly broken, many being killed and others abandoning their weapons and fleeing the battlefield,
Now they got Roman-styled military weapons.
along with Titinius. This was a great victory for the slaves. Not only were they able to collect hundreds of arms and pieces of armor from the battlefield, their triumph also inspired others to join their cause. In just a few days, their numbers swelled to over 6,000.
Because now they got, like, hope. Oh, we can beat these guys. You guys want to join us? You can see, we beat them. We beat them. We had them scurrying out.
With their numbers growing, the slaves decided to elect a king, and still inspired by Eunice, they elected a man named Salvius, who, like Eunice, was famed for his divinations and prophecies.
Okay.
As his predecessor had, Salvius took the name of a Seleucid king, dubbing himself Tryphon, after Diodotus Tryphon. He immediately sent his force to pillage the countryside, seeking to attack the large estates and gather more slaves to his banner. Soon he was able to amass a force of 20,000 men, and even 2,000 horses that had been
That's crazy.
taken from the
They got
estates.
cavalry.
He now felt confident enough to attack the cities of Sicily. He marched and besieged Morgantina. Nerva had not been idle. He too had been gathering together an army, amassing 10,000 allied Italian and Sicilian troops. This force assembled, he marched to Morgantina in order to relieve the city. Salvius had not expected such a quick reaction, and had focused the majority of his forces on the siege, leaving only a handful of slaves to guard the camp. Nerva was able to quickly seize the camp, killing the guards and seizing the booty and women that Salvius had left there, before heading to confront Salvius outside Morgantina. Not wanting to be caught between Nerva's army and the city's defenders, Salvius abandoned the siege, preferring to defeat Nerva first. His army took up position on a small hill en route from Nerva's location to the city, and prepared for battle. Nerva's force soon also arrived and formed up. Salvius was quick to seize the initiative, however, charging down the hill with his cavalry flanking the Roman force. It was a disaster for Nerva. His army, being taken aback by the impetus and ferocity of the charge, and with the slave cavalry bearing down on their flank, put up little resistance. When Salvius announced across the battlefield that any man who dropped his weapons would be spared, Nerva's army broke completely, many throwing down their arms and running.
That's insane that Salvius is, like, making demands. And it's working.
Only 600 of the Italians and Sicilians had been killed in the battle, but more than 4,000 had been taken prisoner, others fleeing with Nerva.
Wow.
This was an astounding victory for Salvius.
Which is going to get more people to join the cause now.
Not only had he won the field, but his promise to spare any man who abandoned his weapons allowed him to fully arm his army. He once again turned to besieging Morgantina. The slaves inside the city had been promised their freedom if they would assist in the defense. However, Nerva once again made a disastrous decision, announcing that no more slaves would be freed until the revolt was contained.
Yeah, he doubled down.
As a result, the slaves inside the city quickly betrayed the defenders,
Who'd
opening
have
the
thought?
gates and allowing Salvius to capture the city. Salvius was now effectively in control of the east of Sicily. Meanwhile, in the western part of the island, yet another revolt had started. A slave called Athenion had been inspired by both the First Servile War and Salvius's uprising, and had managed to build an army of over 10,000. Athenion was a man noted for his courage, and also professed to have prophetic powers, endearing slaves to his cause as Eunice had previously.
So you just gotta fake it till you make it, I guess, right?
He too was crowned a king, but unlike his predecessors and Salvius, Athenion did not accept every slave who wished to revolt into his army. Instead, he picked those who had experience of warfare, whilst using the others as workers in order to keep his force well fed and supplied.
I guess beggars can be choosers in this case.
By doing this, he was able to create an almost paramilitary force, with which he began besieging the city of Lilybaeum. This proved too big a task, however, as Lilybaeum was a well-fortified city and was easily able to resist the slaves until a relief force of Mauritanian auxiliaries relieved the city, forcing Athenion to retreat. Despite this setback for the slaves, the entire island was effectively now in chaos. The wealthy Roman citizens were forced to remain in the cities for their own safety, whilst the slaves and lower-class citizens rampaged across the countryside. Amongst this chaos, Salvius strengthened his position. He gathered his force, now totaling 30,000, outside the city of Triocala, and paralleling Eunice and Cleon, summoned Athenion. Athenion answered the summons, bringing 3,000 of his more experienced slaves with him. Possibly out of a desire to mimic Cleon, or simply intimidated by the size of Salvius's force, Athenion pledged loyalty, acting as his military advisor and general. Together they captured Triocala, once again through the help of disgruntled slaves inside, and began fortifying the city.
It seems like they're kind of strong. They're like a medium strong right now. They're not able to take certain cities, but they are definitely able to take the smaller ones.
Salvius declared the city his royal capital, established a cabinet of advisors, and even wore a purple toga with lictors
They don't like that. They don't like that.
preceding him, in effect making himself into the thing the Republic feared most, a Roman king. Nerva had proved himself incapable of handling the situation, and as a result, at the end of his term as praetor at the start of 103 BC, Lucius Licinius Lucullus, father of the famous Roman general of the same name, was sent to replace him. The Senate had assigned Lucullus a sizable force of 14,000 Roman and 3,000 allied soldiers. Salvius wanted to wait in Triocala and fight from the city walls, but Athenion instead advised to fight the Romans in the open, rather than risk being forced into the same disastrous situation as those in Tauromenium 30 years earlier. Salvius accepted this advice and gathered still more slaves to his banner before marching to Scythia with a force of 40,000.
Not bad. Not a bad force size at all.
The slave force made camp just over a mile from the Roman camp, and the two armies began slowly closing the gap between them.
They have a cavalry advantage. That's crazy to me.
Fierce skirmishes broke out between the two forces, each harassing the other with cavalry and lighter missile troops. When the two main lines met, the fighting was furious, both sides suffering heavy casualties, and neither being able to gain the upper hand. However, on the flanks, Athenion was having much more success, winning his side of the battle and threatening the Roman centre. Just as it seemed the Romans would be surrounded though, Athenion was wounded and dragged from his horse.
Wow.
Believing that their general had been killed,
That creates such a divide in the morale.
the slaves broke and fled the battlefield. Salvius was unable to stop the rout, and knowing the battle was lost, also retreated. In this rout, many slaves were cut down by the Romans, and a total of 20,000 lay dead
See, that creates the end is near. The writing's already on the wall now.
at the end of the day. However, Lucullus had failed to pursue them any further, and the other 20,000, including Salvius, were able to retreat to Triocala.
But it's already won
Perhaps
now.
more importantly, Athenion too was able to escape the battlefield.
Okay, how did that happen?
After being wounded, he had pretended to lie dead and had then fled during the night to
That's crazy.
Triocala. It wasn't until 9 days later that Lucullus marched on and besieged Triocala. Though the slaves were disheartened by their defeat at Scythia, they resolved to fight until the end. Lucullus attempted numerous assaults on the city, hoping to take it by force and so cut the head off the revolt. But the city's strong fortifications allowed the slaves to fend off every attempt, inflicting heavy casualties on the Romans. These victories only emboldened the slaves, and eventually Lucullus was forced to make camp outside the city, preparing for a siege. The Senate was not pleased. Seeing Lucullus's
Alright, Senate, you go do it.
failure to capitalize on his initial victory at Scythia and his failure to take Triocala as either the result of incompetence or corruption, they decided to replace him as praetor at the end of the year with Gaius Servilius.
That's crazy, Servilius.
Lucullus was enraged by this decision, seeing it as an unfair betrayal by the Senate. As a result, when Servilius landed at the start of 102 BC to take command, Lucullus ordered his army to burn their camp, supplies, and siege constructions.
Dude, just like butt hurt, sore loser. I'd exile him for that.
And then disbanded them.
Exile,
by doing this,
immediately.
he hoped to humiliate his successor by making sure he would not be able to make any significant advances in the war, and so dispel the charges of incompetency made against himself. The plan worked. Salvius died at some point during 102 BC of unknown causes, and Athenion succeeded him as overall leader of the revolt. Despite this setback, thanks to Lucullus's actions, Servilius was unable to coordinate a concentrated effort against him, and Athenion was able to rampage across Sicily, besieging and taking even more cities. At one point, Servilius did manage to collect a large enough force to try and face Athenion, but Athenion was able to catch the praetor's army by surprise in camp, taking the camp and forcing Servilius to retreat.
Dang.
Despite Lucullus's initial success the year previously, by the end of 102 BC, the revolt was as strong as ever.
And I didn't see that coming.
Lucullus and Servilius were both charged by the Senate for incompetency and were exiled as a result.
Poor Servilius, but the other guy, yeah, get out of here, bro. Get out of here.
In 101 BC, Gaius Marius was once again elected consul, with Manius Aquilius as his colleague. Gaius Marius was Rome's greatest general at the time, and Manius Aquilius had fought alongside him in the Cimbrian Wars and was a trusted and veteran leader. The revolt in Sicily had now got to the point of threatening a famine in Rome, thus jeopardizing
Yeah, because there's so much food coming from Sicily.
the ongoing war with the Cimbri. As a result, it was decided that Aquilius be sent with a full consular army, around 20,000 men including 2,500 cavalry, most likely diverted from the Cimbrian front, to crush the revolt once and for all. Aquilius immediately forced Athenion into a pitched battle. Perhaps due to his success the year before, Athenion was confident that his army, numbering between 20 to 30,000, would again prove victorious. However, confronted by an experienced army led by a skilled and veteran general, the slaves stood little chance. The battle was short and bloody, with only 10,000 slaves managing to escape. During
That was quick.
this battle, Aquilius and Athenion found themselves fighting each other face to face, and though Athenion was able to wound the consul, Aquilius finally killed the slave king.
It's like a champion battle.
The remaining slaves fled leaderless to numerous strongholds and fortifications throughout Sicily. Aquilius was relentless in his pursuit. Each stronghold was besieged and the slaves inside starved into defeat. When the last stronghold of just 1,000 slaves was left, Aquilius sent envoys to them, requesting that they surrender and take their chances fighting animals in the arena. Rather than face this humiliating fate, the slaves did as their predecessors in the First Servile
They killed each other.
War had done and took their own lives, each man killing another, the last falling on his sword.
Which is crazy, but I understand it.
Both Sicilian revolts achieved little. However, they would act as an inspiration for a much larger, terrifying and dangerous revolt, the Third Servile War, under the leadership of the gladiator Spartacus. Our video on him is
Yeah, that's a great video. We already did that one, so you can check out all three of our reactions now. Insane, but you can draw parallels and you can see inspiration from one to the next to the next. This one's crazy though. They were able to create a capital. They had a king for a little bit. They were able to siege and take weapons. They were really they just played with their food for a little bit, it seems like, until Aurelius came in there and cleaned up. But before then, there was much done by Servilius and Lucullus. Insane though, insane how far that they got, especially after that one where Athenion fell and they routed them basically from that morale loss. I thought that was the end. There was no way they were going to be able to rebound off that, but they did for a little bit until new consul, new guy comes in. They clean up crew basically. Second Servile War. Sicily. had 2 of the wars. That's crazy. It makes sense. The first province, the breadbasket, and a lot of slaves to make all that work. Insane though. Appreciate you guys as always. Leave some video suggestions down below. Consider subscribing. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye bye.